The brass nameplate on the door read, "Miss Delilah Montgomery, Private Tutor," in letters that gleamed even in the dusty afternoon light of Virginia City, Nevada. And the woman who polished it every morning had been told by 3 different suitors in the past month alone that her sharp mind made them feel insufficient as men. It was the summer of 1873, and Delilah stood in her modest schoolroom above the general store, watching the silver miners trudge home through streets still thick with desert heat. At 24 years old, she had already earned a reputation throughout Story County as the most educated woman west of the Mississippi, with certificates from a Boston finishing school and a teaching college in Philadelphia tucked carefully into her trunk. Her father, a mine superintendent, had insisted his only daughter receive every advantage before his death 2 years prior. Her mother had passed when Delilah was just a girl, leaving her with nothing but a cameo brooch and a love of literature. The problem, as the town's eligible bachelors seemed determined to remind her, was that education looked better on a man than on a woman. Just last week, Thomas Garrett, the bank manager's son, had taken her to dinner at the International Hotel and spent the entire meal looking increasingly uncomfortable as she discussed the economic implications of the silver crash. He had walked her home in silence and said at her doorstep, "You are a handsome woman, Miss Montgomery, but a man needs to feel like he has something to teach his wife. You already know more than most men in this territory." Before him, there had been Samuel Worth, a lawyer from Sacramento who had courted her for 3 weeks before admitting that while he found her beauty striking, her habit of correcting his Latin pronunciation made him feel like a schoolboy. And before Samuel, there had been Jonathan Pierce, a mining engineer who had actually used the word intimidating to her face, as though her ability to discuss metallurgy and geology somehow diminished his masculinity. Delilah turned from the window and began arranging the primers and slate boards for tomorrow's lessons. She taught the children of miners and merchants, and occasionally offered evening classes to adults who wanted to improve their reading. The work fulfilled her in ways that courtship never had, but she could not deny the loneliness that crept in during the quiet hours. Virginia City, perched high in the mountains with its opera houses and mansions built on silver wealth, should have been cosmopolitan enough to appreciate an educated woman. Instead, she found herself perpetually alone. The sound of boots on the exterior staircase interrupted her thoughts. Delilah glanced at the clock, a delicate piece her father had given her, and frowned. She had no appointments scheduled, and her evening students would not arrive for another 2 hours. She smoothed her navy skirt and adjusted the cameo at her throat before opening the door. The man standing on her landing was not someone she recognized, which was unusual in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their days doing hard physical labor, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of amber whiskey. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, from the worn leather chaps to the dusty Stetson he removed as soon as he saw her. His dark hair was overlong, curling slightly at his collar, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who lived under open sky. "Miss Montgomery." His voice was deep and carried a slight Texas drawl, the vowels drawn out like honey. "Yes, I am she. May I help you? Name is Isaac Ellison. I am looking for someone who might teach me to read and write properly. The foreman at the cattle station said you were the best teacher in the territory." He shifted his weight, and Delilah noticed the book tucked under his arm. The leather binding was cracked with age and handling. She studied him with interest. Most of the cowboys who drove cattle through the area were transient, staying only long enough to deliver their herds to the mining camps before moving on. This man had a quiet dignity about him despite the dust on his clothes and the weariness in his posture. "Please come in, Mr. Ellison." He followed her into the schoolroom, his eyes taking in the shelves of books, the world map on the wall, the carefully written quotations from Shakespeare and Emerson that she had pinned above the blackboard. He seemed to drink it all in with a hunger that Delilah recognized, because she had felt it herself as a girl, that desperate need to understand the world through words. "How old are you, Mr. Ellison?" She gestured for him to sit at one of the larger desks meant for adult students. 26, madam. I know that is old to be learning letters like a child, but my family did not have much use for education. We were ranch hands in Texas, and my father believed work was worth more than books. He set his hat on the desk and placed the worn book beside it. "He died 3 years back. My mother passed when I was young, and I found this among her things. It is poetry, I think, from the way the words sit on the page, but I can only make out a few of them." Delilah picked up the book carefully. It was indeed poetry, a collection of romantic verse published in the 1840s. The inscription on the inside cover read, "To Margaret, who sees beauty in everything. All my love, William." The ink had faded to a soft brown, but the sentiment remained clear. "Your mother's?" she asked gently. "Yes, madam. She used to read to me when I was small, before the fever took her. I remember the sound of her voice more than the words, and I would like to be able to read what she loved." There was no shame in his admission, only honest determination. Something in Delilah's chest loosened. Here was a man who sought knowledge not to prove anything, but because he genuinely wanted to learn. "I can teach you, Mr. Ellison. My evening classes begin at 7 o'clock and run until 9. We meet 4 days a week, and the cost is $2 monthly. I can pay that." He reached for his pocket, but she held up a hand. "The first lesson is complimentary. You may decide after tonight whether you wish to continue." She glanced at the clock again. "If you would like to stay now, you could observe the class. It will give you a sense of what to expect." Isaac nodded and settled into the desk, his large frame making the furniture seem childish. Delilah found herself acutely aware of his presence as she continued her preparations, the way his eyes followed her movements with quiet attention. When her other students arrived, 3 miners and a shopkeeper's wife, she introduced Isaac simply as a new pupil and began the lesson. She had expected him to struggle, but Isaac proved to be an attentive student. He listened as she explained the relationship between letters and sounds, watched carefully as she demonstrated on the blackboard, and asked thoughtful questions that showed he was truly trying to understand the underlying principles, rather than just memorizing by rote. When she asked the class to practice writing the alphabet, his hand moved slowly across the slate, forming letters that were shaky but determined. After the other students left, Isaac remained behind. "Miss Montgomery, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you teach?" A woman with your education could surely find more prestigious work, perhaps at one of the larger schools back east. The question surprised her. Most people assumed she taught because she had no other options, not because she might have chosen this path deliberately. "I teach because I believe knowledge should not be restricted to those who can afford expensive schools or who happen to be born into families that value education. Every person deserves the chance to read, to think, to understand the world beyond their immediate circumstances." "Why do you want to learn, Mr. Ellison?" He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "For the same reason, I suppose. I have spent my whole life being told what to think by men who could read and write, men who used their education as a weapon to keep people like me in our place. I want to be able to form my own opinions, to read newspapers and books and decide for myself what is true. And I want to understand what my mother loved about those poems. Delilah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Then we share a common purpose. Knowledge as liberation, not as a tool for superiority. You said that beautifully. Isaac met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. The foreman was right. You are the best teacher in the territory. Over the following weeks, Isaac became Delilah's most dedicated student. He arrived early for each lesson, stayed late to practice, and carried a small notebook with him everywhere, so he could write down new words he encountered during his workday. He had taken a job at the cattle station just outside Virginia City, managing the animals that were brought in to feed the mining camps, and he often came to class still smelling of hay and leather. Delilah found herself looking forward to those evening lessons with an anticipation that went beyond professional satisfaction. Isaac was unlike any man she had ever known. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, absorbing not just her words but the ideas behind them. When she lent him books, he returned them with careful observations written in his improving handwriting on scraps of paper tucked between the pages. He wanted to understand everything, from basic grammar to complex philosophy, and he never once suggested that her knowledge made him feel lesser. One evening in late August, after the other students had departed, Isaac lingered as had become his habit. Delilah was shelving books when he spoke. "Miss Montgomery, I finished the novel you lent me, the one about the French Revolution. A Tale of Two Cities. What did you think?" She turned to face him, genuinely curious. She had wondered if Dickens might be too advanced, but Isaac had insisted on trying. "I think Sidney Carton was a fool and a hero in equal measure. He wasted so much of his life, but in the end, he found something worth dying for. It made me think about how we spend our days, whether we are building something meaningful or just passing time until we are gone." Isaac stood and walked to the window, looking out over the lamplit streets. "I spent 10 years working cattle drives, going from Texas to Kansas and back again, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. I thought that was freedom, but it was just another kind of waste, like Carton drinking away his brilliance in taverns." Delilah joined him at the window, close enough that she could smell the soap he had used to wash away the day's work. "And now I think maybe it is time to build something, to put down roots and see what grows." He glanced at her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her heart race. "I have been in Virginia City for 2 months, and I have learned more than just reading and writing." "What else have you learned?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "That intelligence is not something to fear in a person. That a woman who knows her own mind is not intimidating but inspiring. That I could spend every evening for the rest of my life listening to you talk about books and ideas and never grow tired of it." Isaac turned to face her fully. "Your intelligence captivates me completely, Miss Montgomery. I hope that does not offend you." Delilah's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her, had ever suggested that her education was something to admire rather than hide. "It does not offend me, Mr. Ellison. It is perhaps the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." "Then may I also say that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and that I would very much like to court you properly if you would allow it." She should have felt hesitant. They had known each other for such a short time, and he was a cowboy with no formal education, while she had been trained in the finest schools back east. But as she looked at Isaac, at the honesty in his amber eyes and the careful way he held himself as though afraid she might refuse, Delilah realized that all the educated men who had courted her had never really seen her. They had seen only a problem to be solved, a woman who needed to be made smaller so they could feel larger. Isaac saw her exactly as she was and wanted more, not less. "I would like that very much," she said. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert mountains. "Then perhaps you would do me the honor of joining me for dinner tomorrow evening. I know I am not sophisticated like the other men who have courted you, but I promise to be good company." "Mr. Ellison, sophistication is vastly overrated. I would be delighted to join you." The next evening, Isaac arrived at her door dressed in new clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He looked nervous in a way that Delilah found endearing, and when he offered his arm, his hand trembled slightly. They walked through Virginia City's crowded streets to a small restaurant that served hearty food to the working men of the town. It was not the fancy international hotel where Thomas Garrett had taken her, but Delilah found she preferred it. There was something honest about the simple wooden tables and the smell of beef stew, something real that the hotel's crystal chandeliers had lacked. Over dinner, Isaac told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the long cattle drives where he had spent months under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. He spoke about his father's harshness and his mother's gentleness, about finding her poetry book and realizing there was a whole world beyond ranches and cattle that he had never been allowed to explore. In turn, Delilah told him about Boston, about feeling out of place among girls who cared more for social graces than actual learning, about her father's pride when she had graduated at the top of her class. She confessed her loneliness in Virginia City, the way men seemed to shrink away from her education as though it might be contagious. "Their loss," Isaac said firmly. "Any man who cannot see the value in an educated partner is a fool. I would rather spend my life learning from someone smarter than me than stagnating with someone who never challenges me to be better." "You are smarter than you give yourself credit for," Delilah replied. "Intelligence is not just about formal education. The way you observe the world, the questions you ask, the connections you make between ideas, those are signs of a sharp mind. You simply were not given the tools to express it until now." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand, a bold gesture that sent warmth flooding through her. "You have given me more than tools, Miss Montgomery. You have given me possibility, a future that looks different than just another cattle drive, another temporary job. When I am with you, I feel like maybe I could be someone worth knowing." "You already are someone worth knowing," she said, squeezing his fingers. "You were before you could read a single word." They courted throughout the autumn, as the aspens turned gold in the mountains and the desert air took on a crisp edge. Isaac continued his lessons with dedication, and Delilah watched with pride as his reading improved from halting and uncertain to smooth and confident. He devoured every book she lent him, from adventure novels to scientific treatises, and their conversations ranged across subjects that would have bored her previous suitors to tears. But it was not just intellectual companionship that grew between them. Isaac was attentive in ways that made Delilah's heart flutter. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, learned which tea she preferred, and listened with genuine interest when she spoke about her students or her own studies. He made her laugh with stories from the cattle station, and he never once suggested that she should soften her opinions or hide her knowledge to make him feel more comfortable. In turn, Delilah found herself drawn to Isaac's quiet strength, his gentle humor, and the way he treated everyone with the same respect regardless of their station. He was kind to her young students, patient with shopkeepers, and fair with the men he supervised at the cattle station. He worked hard without complaint and spent his evenings either in her classroom or walking with her through the cooling streets, talking about everything and nothing. By November, Delilah knew she was in love. It was different from anything she had felt before, deeper and more certain. With other men, She had always felt like she was performing a role, hiding parts of herself to be acceptable. With Isaac, she could be entirely herself, brilliant and passionate and opinionated, and he loved her not despite those qualities but because of them. One evening, as they walked back from dinner, Isaac pulled her into the shadow of a building and kissed her. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like lightning and warmth and coming home all at once. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Delilah. I have loved you since that first night when you treated me like my desire to learn mattered, like I was worth teaching. You have changed my entire life." "I love you too," she whispered, "so much that it frightens me sometimes. I never thought I would find someone who could understand me the way you do." "I want to marry you," Isaac said, pulling back to meet her eyes. "I know I am just a cowboy and you deserve someone with more to offer, but I swear I will spend every day of my life making you happy. I will build us a good life. I will support your teaching, and I will never, never ask you to be anything less than exactly who you are." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. "You are not just a cowboy, Isaac Ellison. You are the best man I have ever known, and yes, I will marry you. Gladly." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Delilah felt the last walls around her heart crumble. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had dreamed of without quite knowing it. Not a man who tolerated her intelligence, but one who celebrated it. Not someone who wanted to diminish her, but someone who wanted to grow alongside her. They married in December, in a small ceremony at the Catholic church on the hill. Delilah wore her mother's cameo and a simple white dress, and Isaac wore a new suit that he had saved for months to purchase. Her students attended, along with the men from the cattle station and several of the families whose children she taught. It was not a grand society wedding, but it was filled with genuine warmth and joy. After the ceremony, Isaac carried her across the threshold of the small house he had been fixing up for months, a tidy two-room structure on the edge of town with a view of the mountains. He had built bookshelves along one wall, knowing how much her collection meant to her, and had set up a desk by the window where she could prepare lessons and continue her own studies. "It is not much," he said, suddenly nervous, "but it is ours." Delilah turned to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Isaac treating her with a gentleness that made her love him even more. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Delilah read aloud from his mother's poetry book while Isaac traced patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. It was, she thought, the most perfect day of her life. Married life suited them both. Delilah continued teaching, and Isaac took on more responsibility at the cattle station until he was promoted to manager. They fell into easy rhythms, cooking breakfast together before dawn, meeting for lunch when his work allowed, spending evenings either at her school or at home reading side by side. On Sundays, they would pack food and ride out into the hills, where Isaac taught Delilah to handle horses better, and she would read aloud while they picnicked under the vast Nevada sky. Their first real challenge came in the spring, when the owner of the building where Delilah held her classes decided to sell. The new owner wanted to turn the space into a saloon, which would have left Delilah without a place to teach. She came home one evening near tears, devastated at the thought of having to turn away her students. Isaac held her close and let her cry out her frustration. Then he said, "What if we built our own school? A real one, not just rented rooms, but a proper building with classrooms and a library. A place that could serve everyone in Virginia City who wants to learn." Delilah pulled back to look at him. "That would cost a fortune. We do not have that kind of money." "Not yet, but we could raise it. You are the best teacher in the territory, Delilah. people know that. And I have some money saved from my years on the cattle drives. We could start there and ask for donations, maybe get support from the mine owners who want educated workers. It would take time, but I believe we could do it. Over the next year, they worked tirelessly toward that goal. Delilah reached out to every family she had ever taught, to the businessmen and mine superintendents, to anyone who might see value in education. She wrote letters to organizations back east that supported frontier schools. Isaac drew up plans for a building with 3 classrooms, a library, and a large common room for community events. He met with carpenters and builders, negotiating costs and timelines. The town's response surprised them both. People donated money, materials, and labor. The miners, many of whom Delilah had taught to read, showed up on weekends to help with construction. The merchants provided supplies at cost. Even the saloon owner who had displaced her original classroom felt guilty enough to contribute lumber. By the fall of 1875, the Montgomery Ellison School opened its doors. It was a beautiful building, simple but solid, with tall windows that let in desert light and rows of desks that Isaac had built himself during the long summer evenings. Above the entrance, carved into a wooden plaque, were the words "Knowledge as Liberation," a phrase that had become their shared motto. Delilah hired 2 additional teachers, allowing them to serve more students across different age groups and skill levels. She taught advanced classes in literature, history, and mathematics, while Isaac, who had continued his own education with remarkable dedication, began teaching basic literacy and practical skills like bookkeeping and business writing. He turned out to be a natural teacher, patient and encouraging with students who reminded him of his younger self. Their school became the heart of Virginia City's community. During the day, children attended regular classes. In the evenings, adults came for continuing education. On weekends, they hosted lectures and debates, bringing in speakers from Carson City and Sacramento to discuss everything from mining technology to women's suffrage. The library, stocked with books donated from across the West, became a gathering place where anyone could come to read or study. Through it all, Delilah and Isaac's love deepened. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing not just their lives but their work and their dreams. Isaac never stopped marveling at his wife's brilliance, and Delilah never stopped appreciating the way he had seen her, truly seen her, when others had looked away. They challenged each other intellectually, supported each other emotionally, and built something together that neither could have achieved alone. In the spring of 1876, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news brought both joy and fear. She worried about having to step back from the school, about losing the identity she had built for herself. But Isaac simply took her hands and said, "You will be an extraordinary mother because you are an extraordinary woman. And nothing about having a child means you have to stop teaching or learning or being exactly who you are. We will figure it out together." And they did. When their son was born in November, a healthy baby with Isaac's amber eyes and Delilah's dark hair, they named him William, after Isaac's mother's beloved. Delilah took only 4 weeks away from the school before returning to teaching, bringing William with her in a basket that Isaac had woven from willows. The students adored having a baby in the classroom, and William grew up surrounded by books and learning, and the sound of his parents' voices discussing ideas. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, and they named her Margaret after Isaac's mother. She was curious and headstrong from the start, already reaching for books before she could walk. Isaac doted on both children, but he also made sure to give Delilah time for her own pursuits. He would take the children on weekend adventures, teaching them to ride and explore the hills, while Delilah worked on the correspondence course she had begun through a university in California, continuing her own education even as she educated others. The years passed in a blur of happy chaos. The school grew, adding more teachers and more programs. Virginia City's silver boom began to wane, but the town remained vibrant, sustained now not just by mining wealth, but by the community that had formed around education and culture. Delilah became known throughout Nevada as an advocate for education reform, writing articles for newspapers and speaking at territorial meetings about the importance of accessible schooling. Isaac proved to have a gift for administration, managing the school's finances and expansion with the same careful attention he had once brought to managing cattle. He still taught several classes a week, but he also served on the town council and worked to establish satellite schools in smaller mining camps throughout the region. He became a respected leader in Virginia City, though he never forgot where he had come from or stopped being grateful for the education that had changed his life. One evening in 1883, when William was 7 and Margaret was 5, the family sat together in their parlor, which had expanded along with their house over the years. The children were practicing their letters, competing to see who could write more words correctly. Isaac sat in his favorite chair with a book, reading glasses perched on his nose. Delilah worked on her correspondence, writing a letter to a women's college in the East about establishing scholarship funds for frontier students. She paused and looked around at her family, at the shelves overflowing with books, at the warmth and light and love that filled their home. A decade earlier, she had been alone in a rented room above a general store, convinced that her education made her unlovable. Now she had a husband who cherished her mind as much as her heart, children who were growing up believing that intelligence was something to celebrate, and work that mattered more than she could have imagined. Isaac looked up from his book and caught her watching. "What are you thinking about?" he asked with the soft smile that still made her heart flutter. "How grateful I am for all of this. For you." He set down his book and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were eye level. In front of the children, who had paused their writing to watch with the fascinated attention kids always paid to their parents' affection, Isaac took Delilah's hand. "I am the grateful one. You took a rough cowboy who could barely write his name and gave him an education, a purpose, a family, and a life beyond anything I imagined possible. Your intelligence did not just captivate me, Delilah. It saved me. It made me who I am." "We made each other who we are," she corrected gently. "You taught me that being smart did not mean being alone, that the right person would not feel threatened by my mind but excited by it. You gave me partnership and love and the freedom to be completely myself." William made a face at the sappiness of his parents, but Margaret sighed happily. "When I grow up," their daughter announced, "I want to marry someone who likes that I am smart too." "You will, sweetheart," Isaac said, pulling Margaret into his lap. "And you, William, will be smart enough to find a partner who challenges you and makes you better, just like your mother does for me." "I will probably just stay a bachelor," William said with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old. "Girls talk too much." They all laughed, and the evening continued with the comfortable rhythm of a family that loved each other. Later, after the children were asleep, Delilah and Isaac sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. The desert air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and the distant sound of the stamp mills that still operated in the mining district. "You ever miss it?" Delilah asked. "The open range, the cattle drives, the freedom of that life." Isaac considered the question seriously, as he always did. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, Everything I needed could fit in a saddle bag, and the only decisions I had to make were about weather and water and which trail to take. But I would never go back. That life was running, Delilah. I was running from my father's expectations, from my own fears about not being good enough or smart enough. This life, our life, this is about building something, about choosing to stay and grow roots and see what becomes of us. I would take this complexity over that simplicity any day. Even when the children are driving us mad, or when the school furnace breaks in January, or when we have to referee disputes between parents about curriculum, he laughed and pulled her close. Especially then, because it means we matter. What we do matters. The school we built is changing lives, Delilah. Every child who learns to read, every adult who discovers they are capable of more than they thought, every person who walks through our doors and leaves with more possibility than they arrived with, that is meaning. That is legacy. You have become quite the philosopher, Mr. Ellison. I had an excellent teacher, Miss Montgomery. Mrs. Ellison, she corrected with a smile. The best name I ever learned to write, he said, and kissed her under the vast Nevada stars. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. William grew into a thoughtful boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's love of learning. He developed a fascination with engineering and would spend hours designing elaborate structures with whatever materials he could find. Margaret became exactly the fierce, intelligent girl her parents had hoped she would be. Always reading, always questioning, always pushing boundaries in ways that made Delilah simultaneously proud and exhausted. In 1887, when William was 11 and Margaret was 9, Delilah gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and James. Their arrival threw the household into wonderful chaos. Isaac, now 40 years old, proved to be an even more patient father the second time around, walking the floor with colicky babies while simultaneously helping William with geometry problems and listening to Margaret recite the Gettysburg Address. The school thrived despite, or perhaps because of, the economic uncertainty that gripped Virginia City as the silver mines played out. Education became seen as the path forward, the way to build lives that were not dependent on mineral wealth. Delilah developed programs for displaced miners, helping them learn new trades and skills. Isaac worked with local businesses to create apprenticeships and training opportunities. Together, they transformed their school from just a place of learning into a genuine engine of community development. In 1890, Nevada began discussing statehood more seriously, and Delilah was invited to testify before the territorial legislature about education policy. It was a significant honor and also controversial. Many men still believed women should not involve themselves in politics, and Delilah received several letters telling her to stay home where she belonged. Isaac, predictably, was furious about the letters. How dare they? He demanded, pacing their bedroom while Delilah packed for her trip to Carson City. You have done more for education in this territory than any man serving in that legislature. Your voice deserves to be heard. I know, Delilah said calmly. She had long since learned to let criticism roll off her back. Years of being told she intimidated men had given her thick skin. But anger will not help. I will simply go there, present my ideas clearly and logically, and trust that good sense will prevail. I am coming with you. You do not need to do that. You have responsibilities here, and the children will be fine with Mary for a few days. Mary was the young teacher they had hired the previous year, and she often helped with the children. I am coming because I want to, not because you need me to. I want to sit in that gallery and watch my brilliant wife change the future of education in Nevada. I want to be there to celebrate when you succeed. Delilah crossed to him and cupped his face in her hands. "Have I told you lately that you are the best thing that ever happened to me?" "Not since this morning," he said with a smile. "I am due for another reminder." The trip to Carson City was Delilah's triumph. She spoke eloquently about the need for accessible education, for teacher training programs, for libraries in every community regardless of size. She presented data on literacy rates and economic development, on the correlation between education and prosperity. And she did it all while fielding questions that ranged from thoughtful to dismissive, never losing her composure or her conviction. Isaac watched from the gallery, his pride evident to everyone who saw him. When one legislator made a condescending comment about women's proper place, Isaac's jaw clenched, but Delilah simply smiled and said, "Sir, my proper place is wherever I can use my education and experience to serve my community, just as your proper place is here, serving yours. We are not so different in our goals, even if our methods vary." The response won her respect, even from skeptics. By the end of her testimony, the mood in the room had shifted. Several legislators approached her afterward to discuss her ideas further, and within a year, many of her recommendations had been incorporated into territorial policy. That evening, as they celebrated in their hotel room, Isaac pulled Delilah into his arms. "Do you realize what you did today? You changed history. Generations of children will receive better education because of the work you did in that chamber." "We did," she corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you. Without the school we built together, without the example we set in Virginia City, without your constant support and belief in me. I just loved you, Delilah. That was the easy part." "Love is never the easy part," she said, kissing him softly. "But with you, it has been the best part." They returned to Virginia City as local heroes. The newspaper ran a glowing article about Delilah's testimony, and even the men who had previously dismissed her as too educated seemed to gain new respect. The school received a surge of donations and support, allowing them to expand their programs even further. As the 1890s progressed, the Ellison family became an institution in Virginia City. William attended university in California, studying civil engineering, but returned every summer to work with his father on improving the school building and helping with construction projects throughout the region. Margaret, at 15, was already teaching younger children and showed every sign of following in her mother's footsteps. The twins, now rambunctious 6-year-olds, kept everyone on their toes with their boundless energy and curiosity. Through it all, Delilah and Isaac's marriage remained the foundation of everything they built. They still made time for evening walks, for reading together, for long conversations about ideas and dreams. They disagreed sometimes, argued even, but always with respect and always with the understanding that they were on the same team, working toward the same goals. On their 20th wedding anniversary in December of 1895, Isaac surprised Delilah with a gift. He led her to the school building after dark, when the classrooms were empty and the halls were quiet. In the library, he had set up a beautiful display, 20 books, each one carefully chosen to represent a year of their marriage. Some were volumes they had read together, others were books that had been meaningful in their individual journeys, and a few were new acquisitions he thought she would love. 20 books for 20 years, he said softly. "Though I could never find enough books to truly represent what you mean to me or what these years have been." Delilah, who rarely cried, felt tears streaming down her face. "Isaac, this is beautiful. You are beautiful. I love you so much. I love you too. Every day I wake up grateful that you gave a rough cowboy a chance to learn, and that in teaching me to read, You somehow taught me to love in a way I never knew was possible." "You taught me too," she said, holding him close. "You taught me that being myself was not something to apologize for, that my intelligence was not a flaw but a gift. You taught me that the right person would celebrate every part of me, not just the parts that made them comfortable. You taught me what partnership really means." They kissed, surrounded by the books that had brought them together and the knowledge they had shared, in the school they had built from nothing but determination and love. It was, Delilah thought, exactly where they belonged. The new century arrived with both hope and change. Virginia City's population had declined as the silver mines closed, but the town remained viable thanks to the diverse economy that had developed. The Montgomery Ellison School adapted too, focusing more on practical skills and correspondence courses that could serve students throughout the region. Delilah began writing textbooks, her clear explanations and thoughtful approach making her materials popular throughout the West. Isaac, now in his 50s, had slowed down only slightly. He still taught classes, still worked on improvement projects, still supported his wife's ambitions with the same enthusiasm he had shown as a young cowboy learning his letters. The years had added silver to his dark hair and lines around his eyes, but to Delilah he was as handsome as ever, perhaps more so because of everything they had lived through together. Their children brought them grandchildren in time. William married a lovely woman named Clara, who shared his passion for building, and they gave Delilah and Isaac 2 grandsons. Margaret followed her heart to San Francisco, where she became a teacher at a progressive school for girls, and married a kind professor who, like Isaac, loved his wife's fierce intelligence. The twins both went into business, using the education their parents had insisted upon to build successful careers in commerce. Through every milestone, Delilah and Isaac remained each other's foundation. They grew old together in the house that had expanded to accommodate their growing family, in the town that had become home, surrounded by the books and memories and love they had accumulated across the decades. In the spring of 1910, as they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Isaac took Delilah's hand. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their movements slower, but their connection was as strong as ever. "You remember that first night?" he asked. "When I showed up at your door with my mother's book of poetry, barely able to read my own name. I remember thinking you had the most beautiful eyes I had ever seen," Delilah admitted. "And I remember the way you looked at my books, like they held all the secrets of the universe." They did, in a way. They held the secret to becoming someone I could be proud of, to building a life that mattered, to finding you. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I meant it, you know, what I said all those years ago. Your intelligence captivates me completely. It captivated me then, and it captivates me now, and it will captivate me until I take my last breath. And you, Isaac Ellison, taught me what love really means. Not performing or pretending or making yourself smaller, but being seen and accepted and celebrated for exactly who you are. You gave me that gift, and I have been grateful for it every single day of our marriage." Their grandchildren's laughter echoed across the yard, mingling with the desert wind that had always been the soundtrack of their lives in Nevada. Inside, the house was full of books and photographs and all the evidence of a life well lived together. The school they had built still stood strong in the center of town, a testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they supported each other's dreams. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Delilah leaned against Isaac's shoulder. They had traveled so far from that first evening when a young cowboy had asked for reading lessons, and a lonely teacher had found something she had not known she was searching for. They had built not just a school but a legacy, not just a family but a model of what partnership could be when two people truly saw and valued each other. "You think they will remember us?" Delilah asked quietly, watching their grandchildren. "After we are gone, do you think any of this will matter?" "Every child who learns to read because of the school we built will remember," Isaac said firmly. "Every person who discovers they are capable of more than they thought because someone believed in education will remember. Every couple who builds a partnership based on mutual respect instead of one person diminishing the other will remember. Maybe they will not know our names, but they will inherit what we created. That is what matters. Then we did well. We did very well indeed." They sat together as the stars emerged, as they had done countless times over the decades. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that meeting. The educated woman who had been told she intimidated men had found the cowboy who said her intelligence captivated him completely. And together, they had proved that love was not about one person being less so the other could be more. It was about both people growing together, challenging and supporting and celebrating each other, building something neither could have achieved alone. As night fell over Virginia City, Delilah and Isaac remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had made and the love that had sustained them through everything. They had been lucky, blessed, fortunate beyond measure. Not because their path had been easy, but because they had walked it together, two minds and hearts perfectly matched, two souls that had recognized each other and never let go. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson they taught, that intelligence and love were not opposites but complements, that partnership meant elevation not diminution, and that the right person would always celebrate everything you were instead of asking you to be less. Their story would echo through generations, a reminder that love at its best made both people more than they could be alone, and that true captivation came not from making yourself smaller, but from daring to be fully, completely, brilliantly yourself.